Most people trying to lose belly fat believe the same simple idea: run more, burn more calories, and eventually the fat will disappear. But here's the strange reality researchers have started noticing. Some people run several miles a week and still struggle with stubborn visceral fat, while others barely do structured cardio and somehow stay lean for decades. The difference is not discipline, and it is not genetics as much as people think. The real difference is something far more basic: how their daily life interacts with human biology. Long before gyms, fitness trackers, or morning runs existed, humans lived in ways that naturally prevented dangerous fat from building up around their organs. They did not count calories. They did not follow diet plans. They simply moved, ate, slept, and rested in rhythms that matched the way the human metabolism evolved to work. And those rhythms quietly controlled insulin, stress hormones, and energy use in ways that modern lifestyles often disrupt. In today's world, we try to fix metabolic problems with isolated workouts. 30 minutes of running here, an intense gym session there. But the body does not respond only to workouts. It responds to patterns. When you eat, when you move, how you sleep, how often you sit, and how your hormones fluctuate throughout the day. When those patterns are wrong, even hard training can struggle to remove visceral fat. In this video, we are going to break down 5 ancient habits that humans practice naturally for thousands of years. These habits do not require a gym, extreme diets, or complicated routines. Yet modern metabolic research shows they can dramatically influence insulin levels, fat storage, and energy balance. Once you understand why they work, you may realize the real secret to staying lean was never about exercising harder. It was about living in a way that makes visceral fat unnecessary in the first place. Before we continue, a quick note on transparency. The information in this video is based on current research in metabolism, lifestyle medicine, and human physiology. It is intended for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice or a substitute for professional healthcare guidance. Everybody responds differently, and if you have specific health conditions, it is always best to consult a qualified healthcare professional before making major lifestyle changes. If you enjoy clear, science-based explanations about how the human body actually works, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We break down complex health and metabolism topics into simple, practical ideas you can apply in everyday life. And in the next video, we'll explore an ancient morning routine that helps naturally optimize hormones like cortisol and testosterone while quietly activating fat burning before your day even begins. What makes visceral fat different? To understand why these ancient habits work so well, we first need to understand what visceral fat actually is. Most people imagine body fat as the soft layer sitting under the skin. That type of fat is called subcutaneous fat, and while having too much of it can affect appearance and health, it is not the most dangerous form of fat the body can store. Visceral fat is different. It accumulates deeper inside the abdomen, wrapping around organs like the liver, pancreas, and intestines. In many ways, visceral fat behaves less like passive storage and more like an active biological organ. Researchers have discovered that visceral fat releases a range of inflammatory signals and metabolic hormones into the bloodstream. These substances can interfere with how the body handles glucose, how sensitive cells are to insulin, and how the immune system regulates inflammation. Over time, excess visceral fat has been strongly associated with metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and cardiovascular problems. This is why doctors often consider waist circumference and abdominal fat distribution to be stronger predictors of long-term health risks than overall body weight alone. But one of the most important things scientists have learned about visceral fat is that it responds less to simple calorie math and more to hormonal signals inside the body. In other words, the body does not just store or burn fat based purely on how many calories you eat or burn during exercise. Hormones like insulin, cortisol, growth hormone, and leptin act like switches that tell the body whether to store energy or release it. When these hormonal signals become chronically disrupted, fat storage around the organs becomes much easier. This is one of the reasons modern lifestyles can quietly encourage visceral fat accumulation, even in people who believe they are doing everything right. Constant snacking keeps insulin elevated throughout the day. Poor sleep disrupts melatonin and raises cortisol levels. Long hours of sitting reduce muscle activity and lower metabolic flexibility. Even high levels of psychological stress can push the body into a more defensive energy storage mode. When these conditions combine, the body becomes more likely to store energy centrally around the organs. Ancient humans did not face these same patterns. Their daily rhythms naturally regulated these hormones through movement, natural fasting periods, and exposure to natural light cycles. Without realizing it, they maintained a hormonal environment that made visceral fat difficult to accumulate in the first place. Understanding this context helps explain why the habits we are about to discuss can have such a powerful impact on metabolic health. Ancient Habit 1: Walking after meals. One of the most powerful metabolic habits humans have practiced for thousands of years is surprisingly simple: walking after eating. Today, many people finish a meal and immediately sit down, whether it is at a desk, on a couch, or inside a car. But historically, eating was rarely followed by long periods of stillness. Hunter-gatherer societies typically continued moving after meals. They walked to gather food, carried supplies, explored their surroundings, or simply traveled from place to place. That gentle movement after eating had a powerful effect on how the body handled energy. When you eat a meal, your digestive system begins breaking carbohydrates down into glucose, which enters the bloodstream. In response, the pancreas releases insulin, a hormone that helps move glucose into cells so it can be used for energy or stored for later. The problem is that in modern sedentary lifestyles, large spikes of glucose and insulin often occur while the body remains physically inactive. When muscles are not actively using energy, excess glucose is more likely to be stored, and over time, that process can contribute to fat accumulation, particularly around the abdomen. Walking after a meal changes this dynamic in a subtle but important way. When muscles contract during walking, they can absorb glucose directly from the bloodstream, sometimes even without requiring large amounts of insulin. This means the body can clear circulating glucose more efficiently, reducing the intensity of post-meal blood sugar spikes. Lower glucose spikes lead to lower insulin responses, and when insulin levels remain more stable, the body is less likely to push energy into fat storage. Several metabolic studies have shown that even short walks after eating can have measurable effects on blood sugar regulation. In some experiments, participants who walked for about 10 to 15 minutes after meals experienced significantly lower post-meal glucose levels compared to those who remained seated. Over time, this pattern helps improve insulin sensitivity, meaning the body becomes more efficient at handling carbohydrates and less likely to accumulate visceral fat. Another reason walking works so well is that it does not significantly elevate stress hormones. High-intensity exercise can temporarily increase cortisol levels, which is not necessarily harmful, but when someone is already dealing with chronic stress, pushing the body too hard too often can sometimes work against metabolic balance. Walking, on the other hand, tends to reduce stress signals in the nervous system. It promotes circulation, stabilizes blood sugar, and gently activates muscle metabolism without overwhelming the body. This is why something as simple as a short walk after meals can become a powerful daily intervention. Imagine replacing 3 periods of sitting after breakfast, lunch, and dinner with 10 or 15 minutes of relaxed walking. Over weeks and months, this habit can quietly improve blood sugar control, reduce insulin spikes, and gradually shift the body toward using stored energy more efficiently. It does not feel like an intense workout, but metabolically it can produce consistent signals that discourage visceral fat accumulation. The lesson here is not that running or intense workouts are useless. Exercise still has tremendous benefits for cardiovascular health, endurance, and muscle development. But metabolic health is influenced by far more than isolated workouts. Small behaviors repeated throughout the day often matter more than a single intense training session. Walking after meals is one of the simplest examples of how ancient movement patterns can align modern life with the way human metabolism was designed to function. Ancient Habit 2: Lifting and carrying. Another ancient habit that quietly protected humans from visceral fat had nothing to do with structured workouts. It was simply the act of lifting and carrying things as part of everyday life. Before the modern era, strength training was not something people scheduled into an hour at the gym. It was woven into survival itself. Humans lifted water containers, carried food, dragged branches for fires, dug soil, and transported tools across long distances. These movements repeatedly placed tension on large muscle groups throughout the day. From a biological perspective, muscle tissue plays a central role in regulating metabolism. Muscles are one of the primary sites where glucose from the bloodstream is used or stored. The more active and developed muscle tissue is, the more efficiently the body can manage blood sugar and insulin levels. This is why individuals with higher amounts of lean muscle mass tend to show better insulin sensitivity and improved metabolic flexibility. Muscle tissue is also metabolically expensive. Even when you are resting, muscle cells require energy to maintain themselves. This means the body naturally burns more calories throughout the day simply by sustaining muscle tissue. Over long periods of time, this subtle increase in daily energy expenditure can shift the body toward a healthier metabolic balance. In contrast, when muscle mass declines, the body becomes more efficient at storing energy rather than using it. Strength-based movements also trigger important hormonal responses. When muscles experience resistance or load, the body releases signals that promote tissue repair and growth. These signals can improve glucose uptake, stimulate mitochondrial activity inside muscle cells, and increase the body's overall capacity to use energy. In simple terms, muscles become better engines for burning fuel rather than storing it. Modern exercise culture often separates strength training from daily life. People sit for most of the day and then try to compensate with a short workout. But historically, resistance movement was constant. Squatting to pick things up, carrying weight across distances, pushing, pulling, climbing, and lifting were repeated dozens or even hundreds of times throughout a single day. The important insight here is that the body does not necessarily need complex gym equipment to activate these mechanisms. Basic human movements already provide the necessary stimulus. Squats, push-ups, pulling motions, lifting heavy objects, or carrying groceries can all recreate the same fundamental patterns that once occurred naturally in daily life. The goal is not to mimic an intense workout session, but to reintroduce regular resistance to the muscles. When muscles are challenged regularly, several metabolic advantages begin to emerge. Insulin sensitivity improves, meaning the body requires less insulin to process carbohydrates. Blood glucose becomes easier to regulate, reducing the hormonal conditions that encourage visceral fat storage. At the same time, increased muscle activity boosts overall energy expenditure and strengthens the metabolic system responsible for fuel usage. Over months and years, this creates a powerful protective effect. Instead of excess energy being stored around the organs, the body becomes better at directing nutrients toward muscle tissue where they can be used for movement and repair. This shift in nutrient partitioning is one of the most important factors in long-term metabolic health. The lesson from ancient lifestyles is not that everyone needs to become a competitive weightlifter. Rather, the body simply expects regular mechanical stress on muscles. Without that stimulus, the metabolic system gradually becomes less responsive. With it, the body remains better equipped to handle energy intake, regulate insulin, and resist the accumulation of visceral fat. Ancient habit 3. Eating in natural windows. Another powerful metabolic pattern that shaped human biology for thousands of years is something modern lifestyles have almost completely eliminated: natural eating windows. Today, food is available at nearly every moment of the day. Many people begin eating shortly after waking up and continue consuming snacks or meals every few hours until late at night. From a metabolic perspective, this constant access to food keeps the body in a nearly permanent fed state. When the body is in the fed state, insulin levels remain elevated. Insulin's primary role is to help cells absorb glucose from the bloodstream and store excess energy for later use. This process is essential for survival, but when insulin stays elevated throughout the entire day, the body rarely switches into its alternative metabolic mode, burning stored energy. Human metabolism evolved to alternate between two basic states. The first is the fed state, when nutrients from food are being processed and stored. The second is the fasted state, when the body begins drawing on stored energy to fuel its activities. In healthy metabolic systems, these two states naturally cycle throughout the day. However, constant eating disrupts this rhythm. Ancient humans rarely had access to food every few hours. Meals occurred when food was available, and long gaps between meals were common. During those gaps, insulin levels gradually declined, allowing the body to shift toward fat utilization. This metabolic flexibility, the ability to smoothly switch between burning glucose and burning fat, is one of the defining characteristics of a healthy metabolism. When fasting periods occur, several important biological processes begin to activate. Insulin levels drop, signaling the body that it is time to access stored energy. Hormones like glucagon rise, encouraging the release of glucose from liver glycogen stores. As fasting continues, the body increasingly begins mobilizing fatty acids from adipose tissue, including visceral fat. Short daily fasting windows can gently restore this metabolic rhythm. For example, allowing 12 to 16 hours between the final meal of the evening and the first meal the next day gives the body time to move out of the constant fed state. During this period, insulin levels decrease, energy stores are gradually accessed, and the body becomes more efficient at using fat as a fuel source. This does not mean extreme starvation or skipping food for long periods. Instead, it reflects the natural rhythm that human metabolism evolved around. periods of eating followed by periods of rest and internal energy use. When this rhythm returns, the body begins functioning more like the metabolic system it was designed to be. Another advantage of natural eating windows is improved appetite regulation. Constant snacking can confuse hunger hormones such as ghrelin and leptin. When meals are spaced apart, the body begins to re-establish clearer hunger signals, making it easier to distinguish between true physiological hunger and simple habit-driven eating. Over time, this pattern reduces the hormonal environment that encourages fat storage. Lower baseline insulin levels make it easier for the body to mobilize stored energy. Improved metabolic flexibility allows the body to transition smoothly between fuel sources. And when energy is being used more efficiently, visceral fat gradually becomes less necessary as a storage reserve. The key idea is not rigid dieting or extreme restriction. The goal is simply to allow the body regular periods when digestion is complete and internal energy systems can take over. In doing so, metabolism returns to the natural cycle that sustained humans for most of our evolutionary history. Ancient habit 4. Sleeping in darkness. One of the most overlooked factors in metabolic health has nothing to do with food or exercise. It is sleep, and more specifically, the environment in which sleep occurs. For most of human history, nights were almost completely dark. Once the sun disappeared, the only sources of light came from fire, moonlight, or stars. The human body evolved within this natural light cycle, using the gradual transition from daylight to darkness as a signal to regulate hormones that control sleep, recovery, and energy metabolism. Modern environments have dramatically changed this biological signal. Artificial lighting, glowing screens, and late-night digital activity expose the brain to light long after sunset. While this may seem harmless, the brain interprets light exposure as a signal that it is still daytime. This disrupts the release of melatonin, a hormone produced by the pineal gland that plays a central role in regulating the body's circadian rhythm. Melatonin is commonly associated with sleep, but its influence extends far beyond simply making you feel tired. It also interacts with metabolic systems that regulate insulin sensitivity, inflammation, and fat storage. When melatonin production is disrupted by nighttime light exposure, the body's internal clock becomes misaligned with its metabolic processes. Over time, this misalignment can contribute to increased insulin resistance and changes in appetite regulation. Sleep duration also plays a crucial role. Studies have consistently shown that chronic sleep deprivation alters several key hormones related to hunger and energy balance. When people sleep fewer hours than their bodies require, levels of the hunger hormone ghrelin tend to rise while levels of leptin, the hormone responsible for signaling fullness, decrease. As a result, the brain becomes more likely to seek calorie-dense foods, particularly those high in sugar and refined carbohydrates. At the same time, insufficient sleep raises cortisol levels. Cortisol is often referred to as a stress hormone, and while it serves many important functions in the body, chronically elevated cortisol can shift metabolism toward energy storage. One of the most common areas where this stored energy accumulates is around the abdomen, contributing to visceral fat. In contrast, consistent sleep in a dark, quiet environment helps restore the natural hormonal balance the body expects. When the brain detects darkness, melatonin production rises, signaling the body to transition into a recovery state. During this period, the nervous system shifts toward parasympathetic dominance, tissue repair accelerates, and metabolic regulation improves. Over time, proper sleep hygiene supports a hormonal environment that favors energy utilization rather than storage. Insulin sensitivity improves, cortisol patterns stabilize, and appetite-regulating hormones begin functioning more normally. While sleep alone is not a magic solution for fat loss, it forms a foundational pillar of metabolic health. Ancient humans did not have to think about optimizing sleep because their environment naturally guided their circadian rhythm. Today, recreating that environment requires conscious effort. A dark bedroom, reduced screen exposure before bed, cooler room temperatures, and consistent sleep schedules can help reestablish the biological signals that the body evolved to depend on. When sleep aligns with the body's internal clock, metabolism becomes more stable and efficient, and when metabolic systems operate smoothly, the conditions that encourage visceral fat accumulation begin to fade. Ancient habit 5. Moving throughout the day. The final ancient habit that quietly protected humans from metabolic disease is something modern life has dramatically reduced. Continuous, low-level movement throughout the day. In the past, physical activity was not separated from daily living. Movement happened constantly as people walked long distances, gathered food, built shelters, climbed terrain, and performed countless small tasks that required the body to stay active. Today, however, daily life has become increasingly sedentary. Many people spend the majority, even individuals who exercise regularly often remain sedentary for long periods outside of their workouts. From a metabolic perspective, this pattern creates a major mismatch with the way the human body evolved to function. Scientists use the term NEAT, or non-exercise activity